To its credit and discredit, Hollywood makes movies that cater to what its very shrewd marketing teams recognize as popular demand. The way Hollywood is writing film right now is trying to appeal to a growing amount of people who would like pop culture to decenter a white male perspective. And sometimes those attempts are clumsy and condescending and pandering and bad. But the reason they're bad is the same reason Hollywood is doing this in the first place, which is to make money. So amidst all this social change and a more diverse young adult viewership, continuing to only make movies that privilege a white, straight male perspective is a very bad investment.
Hello everyone. The moon looks full and bright tonight. It's very lovely. So, what's up with you? I still don't know how to do these things. It's okay. It's a nice night though. It's been getting chilly over here in South Dakota, but probably got like a month left before it really starts getting cold. It's crazy to think that it's September. Igor album comes out next month. That's pretty cool. I don't know. I guess this is how this works, right? There's a stream of consciousness. Yeah, here I am out walking because I felt the urge, especially because I got a little bout of anxiety earlier. Why do these things happen? Sometimes it just does. But, I've been feeling not good lately. Had a headache, and I've got this cute little fear of developing chronic pain or some kind of chronic condition. So maybe that's triggered my anxiety. But some ibuprofen seems to be helping some, and hopefully it goes away. But yeah, I delayed my walk some because I was listening to one of the new Igor singles. I forget which one, the most recent one as of the time of recording this. I think that album might be like really good. All the singles are good, even though they used AI for one of the music videos. Apart from that, good stuff. And I'm actually quite anticipating the album. Igor's actually like doing something cool and unique within the metal scene, and so yeah. Alright, now that the updates are done, I'm kind of torn two ways here, and I've got a car passing me. So I could do what I mentioned last recording. I'm gonna go this way and talk about arches. This is very possible. This is very doable. I didn't check the air quality before I came out here. It seems foggy / smoggy. I'm gonna go for a little bit and then check, because I don't want to be walking out here for too long if the air quality's bad. Another cat. Is this the same cat? Maybe not. I saw a stray cat earlier. Well, maybe it's not a stray. Maybe it belongs to someone. I have no idea. But, jeez. Anyway, two ways: arches or a little internet show that shaped a lot of my life and beliefs for like 5 years. Because I've been kind of meaning to talk about my experiences with this, because plenty of people have talked about it, but I don't know if there's that many perspectives out there coming from someone who was like in it. I'm talking about Efap, the little internet show that's headed by the YouTuber Mahler, and he's got like Rags with him as the co-host. those two have been there since the beginning. There was another host that has since quit, well, and is now doing things in the background, but, you know, not on the show proper. And, you know, it's a fairly popular little show, and so it's gotten coverage from plenty of content creators. But again, I don't know if any, like, big names or, like, much attention has been brought to people who were actually fans and then later came out and gave their perspective on things. Maybe. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people who became disillusioned with the show and all that, but I haven't seen a ton of them. And I know that this isn't going to get a ton of attention, but, you know, it's just one of those things. Us artists, we don't necessarily do these things to get eyes on it. It's just we feel like we need to put it out there in the world, and if it does get attention, then that's cool. That's what's going on here. I don't know how many people are going to see this, probably not many, but for the people who do watch this, consider it a PSA. My PSA is to not engage with Efap in like any meaningful way. Who's talking up ahead? Who's whistling? God damn it. These people are trying to ruin my career. Update, air quality's fine. So, we continue. But you heard my advice. Don't engage with it in any meaningful way, you know. Fucking, I'm not your dad. Watch it if you want. If you are a fan, hi, maybe hear me out. You know, we're not enemies here, all right? I've been where you are. I was a fan for 5 years. I feel like this sounds like, what's the word? Wow, okay. This has been happening to me lately. Self-important, you know? There's a word that I'm thinking of that's just not coming to me right now, and I don't know how much time I want to waste thinking of it. Whatever. It sounds self-important. There we go. To say that I have, like, some authority on the subject, because here's the thing. I'm not an expert on, like, media analysis or social issues or art or anything of the sort. What I've got on my docket is I have done media analysis. I feel like I'm at least, like, mildly competent and aware when it comes to social issues and art. And I started watching Efap day one. I was there from the beginning. Because my little story with this show starts with a little YouTuber who at the time went by the name The Dishonored Wolf. It is so weird talking about this stuff out loud. I've texted about it. I've texted people about it plenty, you know, talked about it online. Maybe not plenty. It just doesn't even come up that much. This is just like some backstory that I've just kind of had that I don't regularly share, but that's probably why I've like suddenly got the urge to talk about it instead of talking about something like enjoyable. Because I've just had this little story in my mind that is a big part of, like, you know, me as a person that I just don't really talk about with anybody. Probably partly because I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed that I was a fan of this thing for so long, and that I, like, listened to these people and took them seriously for so long. It's a little embarrassing. if you're if you fans are still watching, we're still not enemies, I promise. Okay. I think it's a little embarrassing if you take them seriously, I'll admit, but you know, okay, just hear me out, maybe. So, okay. The Dishonored Wolf. I believe it started with a Breath of the Wild video that he did. It's crazy that I remember this. Because, you know, I enjoyed Breath of the Wild. I think everybody enjoyed Breath of the Wild. Some people didn't, I guess, but anyway. And I don't remember exactly what the video was about. It might have been about that, like, article that got dunked on at the time about how, like, Breath of the Wild reflects Trump's America or whatever. I'm not gonna even fucking touch that. I haven't read the article. Sometimes there are statements that sound like patently absurd, but then you read into it and go, okay. For example, we're gonna go off rails again. Just give me a second. A friend of mine told me about this civil rights activist that once said that Hitler was the Jesus of Europe. And obviously, when you hear that, your immediate reaction is, what the fuck do you mean by that? Because, like, you know, the civil rights activists that we all know and love, they weren't perfect people, because nobody's perfect. And some of them held some problematic beliefs, I'm sure. But, you know, a civil rights activist vouching for Hitler does seem like a little hypocritical, to put it lightly. But then you look into it and you realize what he was saying is that Hitler was used as a sort of scapegoat for the entirety of Europe, because Europe had this, like, long history of anti-Semitism, this deep-rooted history of anti-Semitism, and they did all these horrible, horrible things, all these genocides across the world, really. All right, I gotta pause again. There's a little guy on the sidewalk. I think these are toads. Yeah, these are toads. Got a toad on the sidewalk. All right. That's been our little guy update for the night. What he was saying is that, like, all these genocides across the world, all this anti-Semitism in Europe was just kind of put on this one guy who's now dead. So, hey, nobody else has to take responsibility. All right. Everybody claps each other on the back. Britain continues to occupy and own India and some other places for a long time after, and continues doing horrible, horrible things. And everybody there continues hating Jews. But they didn't have to take it. They felt they didn't have to take a lot of accountability for it, because, hey, at least we're not as bad as Hitler. So the statement Hitler was Europe's Jesus makes a little more sense with that context. And thus, maybe Breath of the Wild being a reflection of Trump's America does make sense when you read into it. I just don't know. All I know is that that was maybe what this video was about. Regardless, it was a video about Breath of the Wild from the Dishonored Wolf. And both from memory and from just knowing what his content was like, there was absolutely an anti-feminist angle to it. There's that guy on the porch. I know he's not real now. That was his whole shtick, is he was part of, remember 2016, guys? Crazy times. That whole anti-SJW movement that was around back then. I can't say it popped up, because these things always exist in the, like, corners of the internet until something happens to have them, like, bubble up to the surface. Like, you didn't realize how many of your family members were racist until Donald Trump started campaigning. Anyway, And I guess to a like, well, okay. I guess to like a 15, 16-year-old me, I think is how old I was at the time, the things he was saying made sense. In retrospect, of course, I am a cis white guy who lives in a red state. This was bound to happen. This was inevitable. When God put me on this earth, plopped me down in South Dakota, it was my destiny to at least have a run-in with the alt-right pipeline. And I did. I was, I definitely had some of those progressive ideals that we all know and love. I, said I wanted gender and racial equality. I wanted what would you call it? I wanted gay people to have rights, I was never like opposed, I don't think, to trans rights. I was just very vocal about how I didn't like understand it and it didn't make any sense and it was kind of stupid. I said a lot of things that in retrospect are pretty like underhandedly homophobic and definitely underhandedly sexist. Lots of that. But I did not want Donald Trump to be president. One of the things I can be thankful for is that I didn't fully slip down the pipeline. Not only did I never like delve into some of the really problematic beliefs, but as you might have guessed, I got pulled out of it. It was mostly college that pulled me out of it. Because, I started like meeting people. I think a lot of what did it, or at least a big contributor, was becoming friends with a disabled Jewish woman. That probably helped a little bit. And this isn't to say that, like, college is the indoctrination station where everybody becomes leftists. Is like, if you're open up to more perspectives, you are better guarded against the ideology of the right, because a lot of their ideology relies on ignorance and lack of experience with people, outside of your circle, or lack of outside perspectives. What college does most often is it exposes you to new people and new perspectives, because it's not just like the people from your town all gathering in this high school and you graduate with a class of like 20 or whatever. People are going to be coming from all over to go to your college. Even the one in Madison, South Dakota. Dakota State University, where I graduated, has so many foreign students. Attracts people from all across the country because despite it being in bumfuck South Dakota, it is one of the most acclaimed cybersecurity schools in the entire nation. It's kind of baffling to me, but the benefit is that it's a pretty progressive campus. Update: another dude on the sidewalk. All right. Yeah, the benefit is that it's a pretty progressive campus, and thus I, got exposed to more perspectives. It became revealed to me the, nature of things. There was one professor in particular that really opened my eyes to a lot of things. Like, the thing that really sticks out in my mind is when he just went off script, I guess you could call it, off curriculum, to say you know what, guys, you know why these politicians are rallying to ban books and stuff? It's because a less educated population is less equipped to question them and their authority and their beliefs. And to me, it's obvious. To, most of us at this point, it's going to be obvious. But at the time, it was like eye-opening. I was like, well, oh, shit, yeah, of course. It isn't just that, everybody campaigning against these books or campaigning for censorship is like misogynist or bigoted or homophobic or whatever. They are. But more importantly, they're, doing this as a power play. Because the, more, I guess you could say, informed you get about these things, about politics, the more you realize it's less about ideals and more about power. And it's, complicated, of course. And ideally, everybody would think that everybody should have equal rights and all that. And we'd all, sing Kumbaya together in a big fucking circle. But the real issue is how power is structured in our society. And the things that people do in power are less to enforce ideals on people and more to maintain and, cultivate that power. So, that kind of thinking kind of led me away from the belief that, feminazis are taking over entertainment and the queers have a grip on the U.S. government or whatever. Because if you actually look at where the power is in society and you don't listen to some fucking podcasters, you see that these people do not have the power at all. But if you are a, sheltered young man like me, and you have some guys playing you clips of, some women on the internet talking about how, male gaze this, man spreading that. God, you guys remember man spreading? Holy shit. I don't think anybody has uttered that word in sincerity in 7 years. But anyway, you get clips like that cherry picked from these, feminist influencers, and then side by side with them talking about stuff you like video games and movies. And you kind of, buy into it. Because you're there for the talk of entertainment. You're there for the ways in which you connect with their beliefs. Because a lot of the influencers that I got into were big on the anti-religious stuff. A less direct but certainly meaningful step on my way to the pipeline was watching The Armored Skeptic, because I was a young atheist. I had begun doubting my faith in God, and then watching his content kind of sealed the deal for me. He appealed to this sensibility that I had that, religion is bullshit and the people who believe it are stupid or whatever. And, the anti-SJW stuff that got thrown in just kind of mixed in with all that. That's how these beliefs are spread. That's how these messages are delivered. They mix in these messages with things that either their audience will just kind of patently agree with, or that most people will patently agree with because it makes sense on the surface. That's the entire strategy behind the trans women in sports argument. Because, on a very surface level, it's these people were born men. They have a biological advantage over women. Most people aren't going to look any deeper than that. And so it's going to make sense to most people. And so politicians and influencers can say these things while just kind of slotting in all that stuff about, you know, bathrooms and restricting trans rights, and it'll just fly because they just agree with a broad statement that was said. Because most people don't look into things. They just buy into whoever they are already listening to. Thank you very much. And that's what happened to me. You know, I believed the stuff about God being fake and stupid. I believed, you know, oh, video games. I like video games. Movies. Movies. I've never been a big movie watcher, but boy, did I sure get my movie opinions from these people. And what was the other thing? Right. It's something I'll get into more, but a big thing with like the Efap people, including Dishonored Wolf, is that they have this objective framework to look at art. And since especially the young atheist me was all about like looking at the hard evidence, looking at the cold hard facts, that appealed to me. Yes, I think I would have unironically watched Ben Shapiro at that age. I don't think I ever really did, but I definitely didn't look at him as the fucking clown he is back in the day. And so, yeah, all these things that just appealed to me, made sense to me, mixed in with these little messages about how, you know, third wave feminism has gone too far. There's all this forced diversity that's fucking up the media, and, you know, that whole deal that we're still fucking dealing with in the year of our Lord 2025. It is interesting how with time you can become so disconnected from the things you used to believe. Like, you know, the term forced diversity would just kind of fly past me back then. Because, you know, I just kind of believed that was a thing that could be the case. Or, you know, believe that it was a serious problem. But it's been so long now, it's like, fuck. It doesn't make any sense. Well, okay, again, it is an idea that makes sense on its face. You say, well, you see, forced diversity is diversity that is forced. It is diversity put in media for the sake of being diverse, to push an agenda. But you don't question what they mean by the agenda because, you know, you agree, yes, I am seeing a lot more diversity in media. It does seem like they're just doing it for the sake of it. That's weird. But, you know, you don't really think about it. You don't look into, like, well, okay, what's bad about that? How does that correlate with poor quality? Well, wait a minute. If, you know, race, gender, sexuality isn't a big deal, then why is it bad that it's in there? Are there perhaps reasons why people want to encourage diversity and might include more diverse characters in media for the sake of it? Like, why are they doing that? Like, actually, instead of the weird bullshit reason that you're coming up with. And the thought that I had about becoming disconnected from beliefs is like, I used to sincerely believe in God, and now it seems like just a weird foreign concept to me, just because of the amount of time I've spent not believing. And similarly, I've spent so long thinking that the term forced diversity is like super loaded with problematic stuff that I just don't hear it the same as I did back then, you know. Where the fuck was I in the story? Yeah, okay, so that was Mr. Wolf's deal. I watched him, I was a fan of his, and again, the little stuff just kind of slipped by me. I didn't really see the issue with this guy calling Rose Tico from The Last Jedi a, quote, fat Asian bitch, end quote. Even though that's like, oh, okay. You can try to say that you're not being misogynist and a little bit racist, but it's just, very interesting that you'd use that particular terminology. That's all. But then, how did this even happen? I think what happened is I just in the process of following him, I ended up watching, I think it started as a stream on his channel. He started a stream with these two other guys. Two guys by the name of Mahler and Rags. I mean, their real names are known, but fucking nobody knows them by their real names. And that eventually moved to Mahler's channel and eventually became Efap. For those not familiar, yes, the allusion to masturbation is intentional, but it stands for every frame of pause. Because if you are not familiar, the format that was eventually, birthed in this podcast is they take a piece of media, a show, a movie, a game. That was pretty much always what it was. And they'd go by it beat by beat by beat, pointing out all the things that they think the media is doing wrong, all the things that they think it's doing right. And when people perceive Efap as an entity looking in from the outside, what they'll usually see is the length of the videos and streams and this what would you call it? Man, I'm forgetting all kinds of words. Reputation. This reputation for being a bunch of bigots sitting around in a circle talking about how bigoted they are. So, I watched the show for 5 years. I can tell you with great certainty that, what went down in these podcasts. Because I haven't watched every episode. I just wasn't interested in some of the subjects that they covered, and so I didn't bother. And later on, I just started avoiding episodes with certain guests. We'll get into that. But I've watched a lot of this fucking show. Probably hundreds of hours of my life were not dedicated to listening to the show because I just have them on the background or something. But, hundreds of hours of my life were spent listening to this show. There was one time when I sent one chat message. I cannot fucking remember the episode. I'm not going to bother finding out. But if it helps, it was at the very beginning. If anybody wants to find it for me, it's, somewhere in the 100, 300 episode range, 100 to 300. Good luck. This is all to say that I know what this show, at the very least, was about. Maybe it's changed. Maybe they all sit down in that little Discord call, come together with their hands steepled and go, okay, guys, this episode, I want to talk about the really deep-seated queer themes present in Marvel's Thunderbolts or whatever. Bug landed on my hand. Maybe that's the kind of thing they're doing these days. And, even if that's not what they're doing, I'd be happy with any change. I'd be happy with, starting with not having open transphobes on the show. But if that's still what they're doing, then I'm pretty confident in applying this, perspective onto them. So here's the deal, everybody. Efap is not necessarily a bunch of guys getting together to talk about how bigoted they are. Because one thing you understand if you really get into the deep lore of Efap is that they have like an enforced policy, kind of. They set out to not talk about politics. And you go, well, wait a fucking minute. Mr. Rags, Mr. Open anti-SJW Dishonored Wolf, they got a podcast together and said, we're not going to talk about politics. That's correct. I don't see why you bring it up. I don't see a problem there. But, most of the time they hold to it. Most of the time they're not really talking about politics. They're not really talking about, like, how women are, like, fucking bad and not texting them back. They're not talking about, like, too many black people in my media. They're not talking about, another gay character, grown. And in fact, there's, bits you can find where they seem downright, like, opposed to those kinds of beliefs. I remember very specifically, in their viewing of the first season of The Last of Us show, at the end of the 3rd episode, with the gay couple that I'm forgetting the names of. Sorry, oops, not a real ally. At the end, Mahler kind of coyly goes, so what do you guys think of the fact that, this episode's kind of bad because it's a gay couple, And they quite, reasonably treat it as like an absurd idea. Because, it's fucking stupid. I probably don't need to tell you that. And so, that's some brownie points for them. Good job. That was definitely an electric vehicle that just passed by me. Woke. And they did an entire stream where they're shitting on this streamer called Synthetic Man. I think that's his name. And if you don't know who that is, God bless. What you need to know is that he's fucking insane. Like, he's actually just batshit. I say that about a lot of, like, alt-right influencers, but no, he's just genuinely insane. He's not just, there's too many black people in media. He's not just, there's too many women in media. He's not just, I almost said a slur for trans people. I'm so sorry. Too many trans people, too many gay people. He'll tell you that, like, the Jewish deep state is using all this media to try to inoculate the population into accepting, like, slavery of the white race. Like, we're talking that level. We're talking, like, people who are currently being elected into positions of power in the US government type of crazy, What a world we live in. So, they've got that going for them. They don't like the insinuation that an episode of The Last of Us is bad because it has gay characters. They don't like an absolute crazy dipshit on the internet calling some of the guests, insinuating that they are, I'm allowed to say that when I'm of homosexual tendencies. And Mahler doesn't mention the fact that America Chavez has 2 moms in his Doctor Strange video. They had JXC on the show for quite a while. And, Jay's a very openly queer person. Rags is openly bisexual. And at that point, I'm doing the thing that, a lot of people of their ilk will say is, like, bad. And you know what? Granted, it doesn't really matter if a person is openly queer, openly bisexual. What matters is their beliefs. So, I suppose we should talk about that then. So, they believe that, being gay is okay. Yeah, I'd say so. For the most part. All right, so I think we should start with the fundamental flaw in the premise of this little show of theirs being non-political. So, first little chink in the armor. 95% of the people that they bring on are right-leaning. Does that not show a bias? I think it does. Like, we can... It can, be denied, but I don't know if it can be, like, reasonably denied. I don't know. I guess it just seems obvious to me if you're consistently having guests of that, kind of system of beliefs or that kind of attitude on your show, you're either doing something that's attracting them or you are, deliberately picking out those people to join you on your podcast. And again, that's like already showing political leanings, even if, regardless of what you're talking about on the show, because, you're demonstrating a bias towards, one side of the issues or one like area of the issues. I'll put on my thinking cap and I'll inject some little leftist nuance into the situation. You're dividing this stuff into left and right is like overgeneralizing. Let's be real. What it really is that there's a bunch of like circles of groups that, you'll find tend towards certain ways, whether you go left or right across the spectrum. But there's going to be overlaps. There's going to be complexities. There always is. But I'm just saying, you don't have on guests like Shadiversity, the Critical Drinker, and Heel versus Babyface consistently without like showing some of your biases, right? You don't have Rags as one of your guests, as one of your hosts, without showing some bias. And the bias shows, we've got some interesting stuff going on here. So, we've got Shadiversity, pretty open homophobe. He's less like transparent about it, but if you observe his behavior, very, very misogynist leanings. God, I haven't heard his opinions on trans people. I don't know if I want to, but it's okay because you'll get them from, say, Heel versus Babyface, who you may know as the guy who was the main character of Twitter for a day, for going on a rant about pronouns in Starfield. That guy, yeah. He's brought on Efap, and we kind of pretend that he's, worth listening to. And then Critical Drinker is, I'm sure, someone that more people will know because he's gotten quite popular in the YouTube space, unfortunately. And I guess the thing that sticks out in my mind is that he actually took the time to look at the races of all the children in a shot of the Acolyte show, Star Wars, which is kind of an insane thing to do, but here we are, as an influencer of that little area of the internet, you are incentivized to see how many, white kids are in my Star Wars show so that you can make a point about DEI or whatever, which is bad because we said DEI is bad. Understand, okay? What I've got going on in my head right now is I'm like sitting at my desk with my pair of glasses that I actually like hold up to my face. And I'm looking down at my file. I've got a file on all these people going down the list. Let's see. Do I remember any more? I guess not really. Those are the three that really stick out in my mind because I've become really aware of, you know, the things that they believe and the attitudes that they express far more openly when they're not on Efap. But this is the other chink in the armor. When you have these kinds of influencers on your show, whether you want to call it a slip, whether you want to call it just them being who they are and you not really having a problem with it, they're gonna, you know, display / express their beliefs. Not necessarily a bad thing. Okay? I'm obviously not taking issue with discussing politics on a podcast. What am I doing right now? I'm taking issue with the beliefs that these people have and the fact that this show, Molly Rags and Fringy, hey, that's another guy. I forgot to mention him, unfortunately, once again. Call myself an ally. Kind of a dud on my part. I think my whole point's moot, actually. Anyway, the fact that they allow these people with like kind of horrible beliefs on their show and just allow them to be there and allow them to gain further audience and allow them to express their beliefs even if just in more subtle ways, just allow that under the guise of like neutrality. That's fucking ridiculous. I'm sorry, that's not neutrality. It's not neutrality just because you don't take issue with things. Anyway, yeah, you get the little hints, I guess you could call it, if you're just watching Efap and you're not going to these other people's channels. You get the hints as to how these people think. Like, I'm now on a busier road, LMAO. Jesus Christ. This is quality audio content. Who fucking cares? 5 people are gonna watch this. It's fine. Yeah, when the gang was covering Wonder Woman 84, Pedro Pascal, noted white man, in that movie has a child that looks to be of Asian descent, and Mr. Heel, Mr. Babyface, kind of took issue with that because, you know, it's breaking his immersion that this white guy has a child that looks Asian. And to their credit, everybody else present was fucking baffled by this, as they should be, because the obvious answer is, he probably had that kid with an Asian woman, and that's how that works. But he was quite insistent. That no, it's just, you know, I think it'd make more sense if this white kid, or if this white guy had a white kid. And this, again, that one's more like bizarre. That one's more just like strange than problematic. But again, it makes you think. And then you get a little inkling of the other things that he has professed, the other things that he believes, and it paints a picture. He doesn't really like the presence of minorities in things. I don't know if you could tell by the fact that he flipped out about the they-them option that you didn't have to select in Starfield. And the character that is like kind of trans a little bit, but not really. It's like trans allegory, a step removed or something. But it's enough for the guy to, freak out. How long has this recording been? Okay, not that long. And it was kind of funny to listen to, because, this exchange goes on for a few minutes, where he's insisting that, no, I just think it'd make more sense if the white guy had a white kid, and everybody else on the show is like, what are you talking about, man? But they just kind of leave it, because they're neutral on this show, and we're just not gonna get into that. All right. And to some extent, I get that, because, Efap is a very focused show that's not known for going on extremely lengthy tangents that go completely off the track of the thing that they were originally supposed to talk about. Like, they don't do any of that in their 12-hour streams. So, with that respect, I can understand. But I don't know, just something about a guy saying things like that, and a guy freaking out about pronouns in his video game, and then they bring on, the internet jester to have another go about some movie on their show. It's just weird. You have the guy who, recorded himself saying, look at all these brown kids, DEI, am I right? Listened to it in an editing software, looked over the video one last time for a final check, presumably he does this, and then posted it on the internet for the world to see, and then, presumably stood by that statement because it's kind of what his brand is about. And then they said, yeah, we're gonna have this guy on as a regular guest. You have Shadiversity, who, God. Like, it's an interesting story, this one. At this point, I think he's just an alt-right grifter, because he used to do content about like medieval weaponry and stuff, and he got pretty popular doing that, popular enough to get quite a few sales on a book, and apparently make enough money to like start a movie based on the book. I'm not gonna speak on the book, I don't fucking know anything about it, but so from what I've heard, that kind of stopped working because Toad, two little guys on the sidewalk. This is groundbreaking stuff. There's another one up ahead too. So two things happened. One, again, he started professing his beliefs that, beliefs such as homosexuality is, not a great thing, guys. Like, look, think about it. Just because animals do it doesn't mean it's right. And you know what I think? I think that a lot of guys become gay just because they can't get girls. Isn't that kind of sad? Isn't that kind of sad, guys? I think it's sad. And boy, the way he talks about women sometimes, Jesus Christ. Very famous for taking issue with Princess Peach in the Mario movie in the trailer, being in like a racing suit instead of her dress. And I'm assuming he took issue with her like taking a spear or whatever, because Princess Peach is like playable in a lot of games, and in like all the racing games since fucking Mario Kart Wii, she's worn attire appropriate for racing rather than her dress. But when has logic ever mattered in the Great Culture War? So people started realizing that he's either a bit loony or he's willing to swallow down his principles for a grift. And then people started noticing that he is a bit uninformed on some of the subjects that he was claiming to be an expert on. And people stopped taking him seriously in that realm. I remember what really happened. I remember this very specifically when I was still subscribed to him. He made a post about how, like, he was banned from some get-together of fans of, you know, all the medieval stuff. I don't know exactly what goes down at these. I assume it's like a Ren Fair, but with more focus on, like, you know, hey, check out this sword that I fucking smith myself. Or, hey, I made this dress 102% accurate to how it actually would have been made back in, like, the year 400. You know? Got banned from one of those. Or at least was politely asked not to attend. One of the two. And, you know, he made a post about how upset he was about that because, like, it's just such a shame that people let something like, you know, just personal beliefs reflect on their view of someone. And I was at that point in my personal journey where that raised some red flags. So when someone says something like that, when someone is upset that they've been excommunicated from a group because of their personal beliefs, the next question you want to ask is, what kind of beliefs? And there you go. Beliefs such as gay people aren't all that cool, actually. And, you know, the women in my media, they're becoming too masculine. And he really does seem to be a big fan of gender essentialism, which is always cool. And so, yeah, he essentially was no longer taken seriously in that field of the medieval stuff. And, you know, I think part of the reason for that is that what I've found in life, you know, culture, is that with a lot of groups, a lot of, like, fandoms, subcultures, if you, like, delve into them, if you really get immersed in it, so many queer people. That's not going to be the case for every subculture, all right? But, you know, this might be personal bias slipping in too, of course, because, you know, I'm queer myself, and so I'm going to gravitate towards the queer people in any given group. But, like, you know, Dungeons and Dragons, the stereotype is that, like, the stereotype is that one post where someone's like, if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, it is a necessity that one of the players is using their character to work through gender stuff. And if it doesn't appear that way, then one of you will be chosen. That's the stereotype. There's a lot of gay people in Dungeons and Dragons. What does Dungeons and Dragons, like, draw upon? Oh, well, you know, medieval weaponry, stuff like that. Fantasy stuff. Is there any particular reason why queer people might be really drawn to, like, fantasy stories? Couldn't imagine. So what I imagine happened is that a lot of queer people in these spaces took issue with Shaz making a stance, or taking a stance against them, and pretty reasonably said, we don't want you here, actually, if you're gonna, like, be homophobic and stuff. And he was clearly kind of offended by that. And then, you know, people in that area kind of lost, you know, respect for him. And he just lost credibility in that area, both because a lot of his audience didn't like him anymore because he was being homophobic. And apparently he was wrong about a bunch of stuff. So he just went to the grift. He went hard to the grift. We were talking, like, to the point of taking issue with Princess Peach not wearing a dress, hopping on the grift, that level, you know? And the people at Efap looked at that and went, yeah, regular guest, come watch The Mandalorian with us. Jesus. I haven't even talked about, like, the way they view art and stuff like that, which is its own topic that, you know, granted, I'm less, like, confident in making assertions about, because frankly, I don't fully know where I stand when it comes to my view on art. Because, so, again, this is if you're not familiar with Efap. Their whole thing is objective critique. Before I go on with that, though, a thing that I remember that came to mind is that, you know, a lot of people will just look at the Jenny Nicholson incident. So, actually, hey guys, you want to look at the Jenny Nicholson incident with me after I pause? Because, I don't know, I want to split up these recordings somewhat, or at least get in the habit of it, because it helps with like storage stuff. So I also want to check the time because I don't want to be up too late. So yeah. All right, guys, I'm back. Someone tagged me in a picture of a sign on at a Japanese restaurant that said something about like a meat sucker. So anyway, the Jenny Nicholson incident. There's a YouTuber named Jenny Nicholson. I really like her stuff. She's funny. What happened was she made a video about Joker. Remember that movie? It kind of faded from cultural relevance, and then it got a sequel, which then nuked its cultural relevance. But, you know, if you look into, like, the director and stuff and what the movie's actually doing, it kind of seems like that was the point. But, anyway. Yeah, she made a video on Joker saying she didn't like it. It was in the title. She doesn't clickbait you. I think the video is titled something like, "So I didn't like Joker," which was a hot take at the time, because a lot of people like Joker, especially a lot of people in, you know, some of the right-leaning circles that we talked about. People from all sides liked Joker. Like, you know, Joker was turned into a, you know, little objective in the culture war. You know, you had to go claim the objective or whatever. It doesn't work exactly like that. Just, you know, certain pieces of media become objects in the culture war, and what happens is that its position in that war influences people's perception of it, rather than, like, you know, the fucking movie influencing perception. Morbid Zoo's video on The Sound of Freedom, like, encapsulates that, Jesus, words, that phenomenon perfectly. Like, The Sound of Freedom only became a big hit because of its place in the culture war. And one of her big points is, like, this isn't about the movie, because the movie's a fucking boring piece of schlock. This was never about the movie. I saw this with Superman. All right, everyone, tangent time. Sorry, little detour here. Put your ETA up 20 minutes. Fuck you. Superman, let's get one thing straight, is not a, like, fucking wide-eyed, red cheek, innocent little apolitical story about just being good to people. That, like, made-up nation that's kind of an antagonist to the story, it's Israel. Guys, come on, it's Israel. Like, these things don't happen by accident. Very, very rarely. Very rarely is there, like, accidental fucking correlation. The movie coming out at this time, this era, depicting a, like, huge, powerful nation clearly and very mustache twirlingly invading another far less powerful country and vying for the support of the United States of America to basically allow them to do it, and getting backing from incredibly powerful billionaires. It's about Israel, and it's condemning Israel, right? Like, come on, guys, come on. Granted, you know, I know one of the things I was like thinking watching the movie is that if it were an accurate depiction of Israel, the people in the crowd at the end of the movie would not be allowed to just run away, right? I was like a little happy to see that at least Gunn and the people involved had the guts to show that someone attempted to shoot a child in the head. And if that sounds grim, if it sounds like, you know, I want children to be shot in the head, I really don't. That's kind of why I take issue with what Israel's doing right now, because they're shooting children in the head. And I just feel like if you're going to make an Israel stand-in in your movie and you're not going to at least do something to express their callous brutality, then you're either chickening out or you're like a Zionist. So, yes, I do want the like crimes of this nation to be depicted in at least some capacity. I recognize that they're not going to depict these soldiers mowing down a horde of people because it's like a T-rated movie or whatever. And, you know, the fucking smarmy billionaire is the bad guy. He always has been. This isn't like a new stance that they're taking with a Superman IP. Lex Luthor's always been a rich guy, and he's always been the bad guy. The rich guy being the bad guy isn't a new trope, but art exists in the culture that they were made in and exist in, right? And so you look at the culture Superman was made in, like, okay, well, this movie's saying something about Israel, and it's saying something about billionaires and just like rich, powerful people in general. All right. Superman is about, you know, the power of good, about being just good to people, and about how like the primary virtue should be the preservation of life. Like, you know, Jesus, I'm getting into politics now. This could go on forever. You know, Superman embodies the stance that I think a lot of us want to take right now, which is, I don't really care about the complexities. They're killing people. I want that to stop. Jack Saint made a video very recently, Zionism and the Last of Us. Great fucking video. And one of his points that he makes, you know, quite carefully, because you very rarely want to tell people to stop looking at things in a nuanced way, because you should look at things in a nuanced way. One of his points is that there's not much nuance to be had in the fact that Israel is the aggressor in pretty much all of these conflicts, and they're slaughtering people, civilians, children, basically everybody. If you actually look at what's going on, it's like, no, this isn't all that complicated. This is genocide. This is colonialism. What they're doing is bad. You know, we want to have nuance. We want to, you know, recognize that people are people and people are complicated, but what Israel's doing is not complicated. It's evil. And so, you know, Superman is the embodiment of like that, and wanting to be him in that scene where he fucking yells during his interview, they're killing people. Like, just getting to the meat of the issue. Like, yeah, there's all these like political complexities, all these political factions and exchanges, and there's these things that Palestine did, there's these things that Israel did, there's this idea of who actually owns the land, who was there first or whatever. And a lot of us just want to slam our hands on the table and go, they're fucking killing people. And that, you know, is, well, because, you know, one of the big things that you see a lot of people on the left side, you know, circles saying is like, look how, you know, look how far they've fallen. The right is taking issue with Superman saying that being a good person is good. Huh. How pathetic. And of course, to some extent, I agree. But it's like undermining what the movie is saying. It's kind of coddling it a little bit, which is a little bit of a weird thing to say, but I hope you know what I mean. Like, Superman is taking a more specific stance than that, and it is taking a more politically charged stance than that. And in that respect, I can understand why people in those right circles take issue with it. But you see some takes online from people who dislike this Superman movie, and you can't help but think, oh, okay, so you think this because of where you stand and not how the movie is, right? Because there's this phenomenon that happens when a piece of media like Superman comes out, where if you are an influencer who has staked their career on being in a particular position on, you know, the political spectrum, when a piece of media comes out like this, you are expected to look at it a certain way, react to it in a certain way, not just because, you know, in a political context, it means a certain thing for your side, but because other people on your side are reacting to it a certain way. And what that does is it either colors your beliefs going in, or it will color how you talk about the movie, because you need to continue upholding your stance, your position in this, you know, political spectrum. And so a lot of people end up saying some pretty stupid things because they're not thinking about this, you know, logically. They're thinking, okay, I need to dunk on this movie because it's what my side is doing. That is kind of what happened with Joker. Not quite the same thing. You know, culture has evolved as it tends to do. Things change as much as they stay the same after all. But that, like, phenomenon can't be ignored when looking at this, you know, incident. I don't think it plays a huge part, personally, because, you know, Efap does, you know, for all the talk I have of them not actually being neutral, they do sometimes sway a little bit from what you'd expect them to think, in terms of, you know, what the right set of circles tends to believe. I'm trying to think of examples, but, you know, it's funny because the example that comes to mind is when they were dunking on Synthetic Man. And all right, another tangent. 10 minutes to your ETA. Fuck you. I'm sorry for saying fuck you. I love you, dear viewer. I hope you know that. Hey, have you been drinking water? Why don't you get up and get yourself some water? But I'll be here. In fact, I'm going to be going on another tangent, so, like, you know, you don't even have to pause if you don't want. Like, just, you know, put yourself first. I'll just be here rambling or whatever. I remember watching this video. I wish I remember the specific subject or the title. I just remember looking at the title and in my head going, oh. Or, okay, I think what I did was I recognized that it could go one of two ways, and I had a suspicion that I was going to go one way. And it did. So I really wish I remember what this video was about. All I remember is that they were talking about a problem in a lot of modern media. Okay. It had something to do with, I think, the okay, I think it was like broadly very vague memory about like the inclusion of political subjects in media and how it's handled. And most of its examples were like modern Hollywood. I remember Turning Red, some Marvel movies, Star Wars, stuff like that, right? And a lot of these types of reviewers and influencers will talk about how like, see how they're heavy-handedly inserting these like left-leaning messages into their media. It's bad and it's poorly done. And I remember him going like, and look, obviously this looks biased, but that's because, you know, these are just the things that Hollywood is saying. What am I supposed to do? But I'll tell you what, to balance things out, I'll look at a piece of media that does the same thing, but on the other side. The new norm. It's like, oh, well, what's the problem with that? The problem with that is that that's the lowest hanging fruit ever. Fruit's hanging so low I could kick it. The new norm is so bad that even the right-leaning dunces were saying, what the fuck is this, guys? This is embarrassing. Because I don't think even the people on their side found it funny. Because it's unfunny, it's lame, it's embarrassing. It's hard to even call it like problematic because I don't think anybody took it seriously. It's more a symptom than a problem, you know? Remember, guys, Elon Musk showed up in the new norm. He chose to be involved with that project. I don't know who still needs to be told that Elon Musk is, you know, more palatably very far right-leaning, realistically a Nazi, but there you go. Yeah, the problem with that is he used a bunch of like examples from Hollywood and talked about how heavy-handed these, you know, left-leaning ideas are put in the media, and then when he had to come up with an example of, you know, more right-leaning ideals or propaganda put into a piece of media, he could only come up with right-wing propaganda, the film. It's like, oh, well, there might be some bias here. What I'm trying to get at is that the bias becomes clear when the only instance of you attacking someone like amongst your group of circles is an example of them being absolutely fucking crazy. Like the new norm is so like unabashedly stupid and so clearly bigoted and problematic, like it's easy pickings. Again, most people on the right are gonna say, yeah, that's stupid and embarrassing. And in a similar way, most people on the right are gonna look at synthetic man and think, oh, someone needs to get him help. Like he needs his like brain taken out of his skull and really rinsed down, you know. Where the fuck was I going with that? I don't know. Joker. Okay, I'll get to the point. The Jenny Nicholson incident was Efap covered the video on Joker. and the stream was 11 to 12 hours long, and the screen cap of the, thumbnail got a lot of attention on Twitter because, despite what they're saying, the optics on that aren't good. 3 guys in a call video with, a woman in the thumbnail, 12-hour length. Like, guys, please understand how this looks. And, yes, in reality, what actually goes on in the stream is more important. And I'll tell you guys what went on in the stream. But if you're then going to respond to the thing that happened, I don't think it's completely fair to just say, like, oh, these people are just clueless. They don't know what they're talking about. I think what you do is you lead with, oh, look, guys, yeah, that looks kind of bad, but here's what actually went down. So what actually went down in this 12-hour stream? What they say is correct. A lot of that stream is not actually talking about Jenny Nicholson. A lot of it is them just fucking around while the video is like there paused. Because, a lot of the appeal for Efap for me for a long time was like I wasn't getting such thorough breakdowns of media like that from anyone else at the time. I'm not saying it isn't out there. It is, guys. Just look, please look elsewhere. But it's not like they're laser focused on that objective. They do a lot of fucking around and just chatting. But it's fine. It's fine, okay? I promise you it is. And, like, as for how they responded to Jenny, can't say for certain. I remember Rags making a comment about how white she looked. And again, it's like, I don't know, I guess there's not necessarily anything wrong with that if you remove all context from the statement. But then you look at the context of, 3 guys in a podcast talking about this woman's video. And also, these are some gentlemen with some right-leaning anti-feminist, tendencies. And the statement takes on a little bit more of a different tone, I guess. But anyway, that wasn't the bulk of the video. I promise you, they don't spend 12 hours talking about how bad women are. They shitpost for like fucking 8 of those hours, and a lot of it is just like talking about the movie and them taking arguments in bad faith. I remember a point being made about how Jenny makes like a joke about like, I guess the movie's about how you shouldn't take your meds, I don't know. And they really took issue with that. They really took that statement and said, oh my God, she's saying the movie's not about how you shouldn't take your meds. That's unbelievable. I can't believe she'd say something so stupid. I don't know. I don't even know if she was saying that, but my guess would be no. Because, where I'm standing, if someone says something fucking ridiculous, my assumption at first is like, oh, surely they don't mean that. I try to take that stance even with people I don't like or respect. I'll usually like say, oh, that tracks if the person has, a fucking belief that completely fucking aligns with that. Like, when I saw on the news that Elon Musk was saying stuff about like the place of women and all that, I didn't go, surely you didn't say that. I went, oh yeah, that tracks, because what hasn't he said at this point? Like, he's supporting Nazis. Like, we're not talking just like bigots. We're talking, they put the salute in their fucking campaign material. Nazis, right? of course he's going to say things about women, you know. But I try to engage with most statements I see in good faith, which is something that, you know, they will do there on Efap, right? I'm trying to give credit where I can. You know, a lot of what people say is like they pause and thus statements are taken out of context. That does happen. And then what sometimes happens is they then unpause, hear the rest of the statement and go, oh, okay, I see. That does happen. But then sometimes they, you know, take a statement like, I guess this movie's about how you shouldn't take your meds, and just like assume that's what she actually literally means and actually literally what she thinks the movie's about. Which, you know, if I were to take that statement in good faith, I would assume that is not correct. But that's just me. And so, yeah, that got really popular. I forgot where I was going with that point, too. Well, this is a bit of a bind I found myself in. Because, you know, I lost the other train of thought, but it's like, okay, don't worry. We can get back to the track that we were previously on. And now we're back on that track. And it's like, okay, where are we going? Where's this track going? It's not on any of our star maps. I think I was just like making a point about how like the show is perceived, especially to people who aren't like familiar with the show but might have seen things about it. If that's the case, you know, there you go. The whole Jenny Nicholson thing, 12-hour video about a woman's opinion on Joker. Yes, most of it wasn't that, was just them dicking around and not actually talking about her opinion on the movie, much less like her as a person or whatever. But, you know, there's always a little bit of that. There's always a little bit of things thrown in. Rags does like to make comments about people's appearance. And, you know, it's like, just gonna be straight up, I don't think that's very nice. I don't think you should do that. I think that's mean. That is, I'm being cute a little bit because, you know, I've watched them for 5 years, so I've heard all the things that they say about, you know, these kinds of responses to their show. Like, they've had to respond to the point of Rags is a fucking dick plenty of times. You know, all these excuses of like, oh, come on, I'm just stating facts. I'm just saying that they look interesting. Okay, what's so wrong about that? You know, things like that. Dodging the issue, dodging the question, the matter at hand. Stepping around these things to maintain some kind of perceived intellectual superiority and some kind of innocence while, you know, smirking to everybody in the back who knows. Which is something he does a lot. I don't know if I ever heard that guy admit that he's wrong, even when the argument is so clearly, all right, this thing you said is false, right? And, you know, it usually ends up being like, well, I was correct when I said it. Which actually, that's something I might need to use. It's kind of funny. You get what I mean, though, right? I think we all have known people like that. People who cannot say they are wrong. They can, you know, be in the position of being wrong and not say, well, I was right anyway, but they won't admit they're wrong. Rags is that type of guy. And, like, just a little tangent, right? Again, this will be like a 5 minutes to your ETA. Don't worry too much about it. That's like a big part of the reason why I started getting turned off from the show, actually, is that Rags is just a dick. And, you know, like, you can say it's like a part of the character. You can say like, oh, well, we're on the internet. Get over it, snowflake. Some of the things he's said are not nice. And what stands out to me is when he said one time, like, guys, don't actually tell people to kill themselves. That's horrible. And I remember thinking, you've said that a lot. You've told people that they should kill themselves many times. And you can say it's in jest, but it's like, I don't know. It seems kind of weird, doesn't it? Like, oh, I was joking when I said it. Were you? I guess we'll just have to take your word for it. You know what? Good faith. Maybe he was joking maybe he's always joking when he tells people they should kill themselves. My bad. Maybe it's just in jest when he, makes a point to comment on people's appearance when they show up on camera. Maybe it's in jest when he mocks and insults people because he thinks they are getting too emotional about a piece of media. Maybe. But from where I'm standing, he's just made too many asshole-ish statements for me to not assume that maybe he is just kind of an asshole. And a big part of the reason why I started, kind of being turned off from the show, even before I was fully brainwashed and became a full, sorry, fuck. I shouldn't use that word. I apologize. I'm probably I'm gonna bleep it out. Yeah, I am. I'm that level of brainwashed. Can't even say words anymore. What I did was I joined the word liberal and a particular slur for neurotypical people. Sorry, neurodivergent. It's over for me. In my defense, I've been walking for a long fucking time. I've been talking for a long fucking time. My throat is dry. I'm tired. Help. Yeah. Where was I? I lost it again. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Even before I was really on the train of oh, these guys are just wrong about most things. I just didn't want to watch the show anymore because I was getting fucking tired of Rags. Just him being a pretentious, that was the word I was forgetting earlier, by the way. When I said self-important, I was thinking of pretentious. I was tired of him being a pretentious, smug asshole. It was just wearing on me. So I just started watching the show less. And then there was a Morbid Zoo quote that I think I'll just find and cut into the video because it's so good. And that was what really switched me off from the show. I didn't believe in, or I was turned off from the show because Rags is a dick. I was turned off from the show because the people that they were having on were telling their audience offline, that, all these gay people, all these brown people, and all these women in media are bad. And this push for diversity is a bad thing that needs to be stopped so that they stop ruining our Star Wars. That was turning me off. The last thing that I had that was keeping me at Efap was okay, well, maybe sometimes they won't talk about, these subjects, and sometimes they won't have these guests on, right? But then that Morbid Zoo quote just thoroughly dismantled one of the foundations of Efap's argument for media as an entity, and it was kind of over at that point. And I'll tell you what, I'll cut in the quote here as I'm entering my apartment. I'm going to sit down get some water, and close this bitch up because I am tired.
But that's the big benefit of any kind of propaganda that appeals to heritage, right? When it works, it's because you've convinced people that if they just stay the course and do things the way you imagine the ancestors did, they will be safe and fine and important. Under that understanding, stories that align with politics you're familiar with aren't actually political at all. That's just normal. It's the stuff that questions that normalcy that's political.
Man, I wonder if you can make a living off of this talking thing. So I can stream of consciousness talking about random bullshit thing. Probably not. There was more I wanted to talk about. You know, because I think, right. wasn't that Morbid Zoo clip cool? There was actually no progression of time. I was just there sitting behind the curtain waiting for the clip to end, and now I'm here. Ta-da! Anyway, yeah, it's pretty great, isn't it? Because what happened was the last remaining reason for me sticking with that Efap is like, okay, well, at least they're, mostly politically neutral, and so I can just engage with the content neutrally, right? Except then I learn, oh, wait, one of their main, points is predicated on this internal bias that they have that I disagree with. Oh. And, look, I don't, dislike EFAP just because I disagree with them on things, right? I disagree with plenty of people on plenty of things because, anybody, I'm just like, I have all the correct opinions and beliefs, and not everybody has the beliefs and opinions that I do. So, naturally, I disagree with them because they're wrong, of course. Blue screened a little bit. That's fine. You can tell I've been talking too long. It's also just been harder for me to focus lately. Something might be up. I'm probably not getting enough sleep, but it's also probably fine. Teehee. Yeah, it's I think that the people that they have on the podcast are legitimately harmful and problematic in the things that they'd say, and so I know one of their calling cards is one of Rag's favorite things to say, at least when I was part of that thing, was how exactly did it go? Something about if there's any sign of your character, it's who you associate yourself with, in a mocking tone, to suggest that who you associate yourself with doesn't matter, which is the kind of thing that you'd have to say when you hang out with Sargon. But no, I believe that who you associate with does reflect on your character, even if just a little bit. And they associate themselves with a lot of bad people. So, yeah, I think that reflects on them, and I just don't really want to engage with them for that reason and more. Then also, it's one thing to disagree with someone's opinions about art. It's another thing to come to realize that their way of even thinking about art is fundamentally flawed and is just not all that useful to you anymore. Doctor Strange needing to fucking use different spells instead of using the same one that's really effective is maybe a thing that I'll think about in my writing or when watching a movie. But I don't think it's really gonna like affect my ultimate perception of it anymore. Because, you know, what the thing about Efap is that they, at least, what I gathered from watching them for those 5 years, I stopped watching them quite a while ago at this point, like a couple years ago at least. Um, but what their whole deal was is that they seem to believe that the ultimate failure of a movie is to not like cohere to its own internal logic. And, you know, I do prefer when stories adhere to their own internal logic, right? I think we all do. I think it's cool when a story is consistent in, its plotting and its characters and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, I don't know, these days, like, yeah, I can agree with those things. Like, the reason I've referenced the Doctor Strange movie so many times, Multiverse of Madness, is because Mahler made a like 4 hour video on that movie, and I watched it or listened to it 3 separate times. Again, I found the content engaging. I found that style of analysis engaging. So much so that I replicated it. Um, I wrote an 80-page essay on the webcomic Two Kinds. And what I did in it was I looked at every instance of plot armor that I could even conceive of and explained why it was either really not that bad or why it, was bad and broke the story. Nowadays, I'm kind of like embarrassed by that essay. I can, recognize the work that was put into it, the thought that was put into it, the same way I can recognize the thought and work that's put into Mahler's videos. Like they're Goliath projects, and he and his editors are good at editing and good at scripting, right? But there's, you know, nothing that substantive in these analyses, at least like in my opinion, from my perspective. Because I think the ultimate failure of a piece of art is if it has nothing to say. And the thing is, that's like the fucking easiest critique in the world to make about like any of these Marvel movies or Star Wars projects that they spend so much time talking about. Is these are soulless corporate pieces of media, and they recognize that they're soulless corporate pieces of media, but then the analysis is focused on how the Mandalorian keeps getting shot in the armor. It's like you know, yeah, that can be distracting, I guess, but also like, damn, is that all you got? Again, like, these things are relevant, kind of. It's fine to talk about them. I'm certainly willing to talk about them, and I will bring these kinds of things up sometimes, but just, if that's what you're focusing on, I think you're kind of missing the point. I think you're kind of watching movies wrong. um, for those not in the know, that was a big thing. Patrick Willem, famed YouTube critic, made a whole video about how plot holes don't matter, and they really took issue with that video. And I for the longest time, I thought that was a bad dumb video, and I thought less of Patrick Williams for it. But these days, like, he's got a point. Like, Plot holes, look, they really don't matter all that much. All right. Again, yeah, better if they're not there, certainly. And it could be a symptom of lazy writing. But, if there's lazy writing, it's going to show in other places that matter more, arguably. Um, the I think another really like important thing, or like something that makes things make a lot of sense in retrospect, is when I was in college, I took a class specifically about literary analysis. And, because I was watching Efap, I was like, whoa, a class for me, yippee. Um, so, I was a little bit stupefied when we were talking about like all these different lenses that you can look at literature from, whether it be like psychoanalysis, historical analysis, Marxist theory, ooh, stuff like that. And, I was all that time thinking like, okay, where do we get to the part where we talk about plot holes and internal consistency? But that's not what we talked about. We talked about what these pieces of media have to say about, you know, humanity and culture and the world and the politics at the time. And we didn't really like engage with, when you do these things, you necessarily engage with how they say these things, but we didn't engage much with like, I don't know, should this like arrow to the guy's stomach have killed him? We just didn't talk about anything like that. And it was weird for me. It was an adjustment for me. And also it was especially weird for me because that's where I learned that Karl Marx was actually like a literary critic. He's known for the Communist Manifesto, and when a video essayist quoted him in a video about art, they all laughed because, he's the communism guy. And isn't it weird that there's a Karl Marx quote in a video about art? And you get to college and learn that it's actually not weird because he also talked about art. And Marxist theory is not just like Marxist theory in the context of literary analysis is about like the analysis of the power structures that exist in a piece of media and how they reflect like the power structures in surrounding society. It isn't necessarily about like communism or the downfalls of capitalism, right? It is going to be about capitalism a lot of the time because, we live in capitalist societies and that shapes power structures, but, you know, they don't care about any of that. Their analysis, for the most part, exists divorced of any cultural context. It exists divorced of like much of the intention of the creators and much of like the things that they might have, put in their work subconsciously, and ends up saying something given the like context of the work. The interesting stuff. Um, of course, there'll always be a bit at the end of these Mahler videos where he talks about like another piece of sludge in the sludge pipeline just coming out, draining out into the sludge ocean. The only cultural context he's really concerned about is this movie sucks. Isn't it? Isn't it bad how many sucks movies there are these days? Like we can look at that. That's something to analyze. Do you want to do that? No? Okay. Because, of course, a lot of the answer is, well, these companies only give a shit about money, and these increasingly tight, like, deadlines for films, these increasingly like strict production times, the increasingly rushed VFX, um, the increasingly like strained writing process and bloated budgets and productions and all that. They're all contributing to much sloppier movies. But I mean, there's a whole lot that you could say about these things. Um, and, you know, there's a lot to be said about how movies tend to be made and turn out these days. But, you know, when they reminisce about how movies were better in the good old days, you can maybe see their point. But it starts to slip in that's like, well, you know, these movies didn't feel the need to like prop up these strong female characters. They just had, you know, these characters like Sarah Connor or Ripley or whatever, and nobody questioned them. And they just don't like examine that at all. The problem is they have this idea of like these things are better because they are apolitical, but they only think of them as apolitical because it is their status quo. It is their like neutral ground, when in reality, all art is political. That's another thing that I disagreed with when I was watching this stuff, but it's true. All art is made in a political context and is shaped by the political beliefs of the author and of the surrounding culture, and thus there will necessarily be politics injected in this. In the like famous, in the example they use of a 10 out of 10 movie, of just a chair in a room because there's no fucking um, plot holes or anything like that. What they'll say is it's a boring, bad movie, but it is a 10 out of 10 by the metric of pure objectivity. Um, in that film, you can say, like, what's political about a chair in a room? And the answer is, well, making a movie about just a chair in a room is a pretty postmodernist thing to do because it goes against like the conventions that we're used to in terms of filmmaking. And if you want to talk about postmodernism as a movement, we could be here all day. I'm not going to talk about too much about postmodernism. It's okay, I promise. Okay, the accident wasn't your fault. If we want to talk about postmodernism as a movement, it won't be we because I'm not an expert on the subject. There's probably plenty you can find. There's probably plenty of resources. But you see what I mean? Everything is political. Everything happens because of politics, right? Doesn't help that it's such a fucking broad term, you know? Like, you know, I know I've said plenty of times, like, this isn't about politics, this is just about human rights. It's like, unfortunately, human rights is a political issue. Well, unfortunately not. I don't know. Like, a thing being political is kind of just neutral. Because again, I'm coming in with the belief that everything is political. All right, you know. Just, you know, we want to live in a world where things like, you know, people deserve to have rights, and like actually women in movies is fine and gay people in movies is fine. We want those things to be apolitical because we don't want people saying like, another sign of the degradation of Western culture. But unfortunately, that's how it is, and it's always going to be the case. These are always going to be political subjects, right? So again, it's just you can't divorce anything from political context or analysis. Sorry, um, but if you are used to a particular way of things and you don't take the time or don't like have anybody forcing you to examine that status quo or question it, then you are just going to kind of fall into believing that your natural state or the state that you're used to is thus apolitical, and everything else is thus political because it differs from that status quo. And, most people see apolitical as a good thing and political as a bad thing. I don't want politics in my video games. That sort of deal. So that's why that Morbid Zoo quote, like, fucking knocked me out of my, like, yeah, it was a slow decline in interest in the show, but that just eliminated it for me. It's like, oh, the premise of all this is flawed. And then I got really into, like, analyzing the messages and the contexts of media with the help of some friends who were trying to tell me that this shit doesn't really matter. And I came around to kind of their way of thinking. And I started watching CJ the X in my, like, full subjectivity state, and they're saying, like, no, we should have standards for art. There should be some objectivity in art and art analysis. And that kind of threw me for a loop because I think CJ the X is very smart and I think they make great points. So it's got me, like, thinking again. So I don't have, like, a super solid stance on how I think art ought to be viewed. And it's not like it's a bad thing for some nerds, some undiagnosed nerds, to talk about how, like, they should have used the Y-Wings in the opening to The Last Jedi. If you want to do that, fucking go for it. But please do not come to me with that kind of analysis. Say that you're not going to bother fucking analyzing, like, political or cultural context or the meat of the messaging of the movie and tell me that you're an enlightened critic that has figured things out that other critics haven't. It's hubris to say that you've just solved what all these other, like, critics and reviewers and scholars that came before you haven't. Close on this thought. The Efap gang was talking about Ratatouille at one point, and they really liked the movie because I think pretty much everybody likes that movie. I haven't seen it in a fat minute, sorry. So I can't give my opinion. Maybe I'll fucking hate it. But they said that the one thing they didn't like about the movie, or one of the big things they didn't like, was, I think his name is, like, Anton Ego or something like that, the critic guy, the one in the meme who, like, has the flashback after eating the famous ratatouille dish. Cuts to him as a kid. He sprained his knee while riding bike, and his mom makes him this dish, and eating the dish reminds him of that moment in his childhood. And I'm already thinking of that, and I'm already thinking of, like, how that can connect to themes and stuff, and it's like, maybe I should watch that movie sometime. Anyway, he goes on to say that, like, critics often forget their place. Critics often forget that they're not risking anything in the work that they do, and they lose sight of what it is they're doing. They lose respect for the art and the artist, and kind of just, like, think of themselves as the ultimate arbiter of meaning and the worth that this art has. And he's saying that's false to think that way. No. he is making the point. He has concluded that critics don't risk anything. They tend to lose sight of the value that art has, and they think of themselves as the, arbiters of meaning and value, and that's not the case. Okay. They take issue with that, which, of course they do, because not only are there critics, but they have staked their position as being, the arbiters of meaning and value, kind of. They took issue with the statement, like, they don't risk anything. And what they said is, like, of course you risk things as a critic. Like, sometimes people won't like your, the opinion that you had on a movie, and you can get flamed for it. Like, you can get a lot of criticism for the things that you think or say about a piece of art. Like, you do take a risk posting opinions online because people might not like those opinions. And I don't remember how I perceived this at the time. I think I just agreed with it, because it's like, yeah, of course that is a thing that happens. But now I'm sitting here like, wow, you either missed the point or ignored it. Because the point isn't that you can't get flamed for your opinion as a critic and you're just like immune to consequences for the things you say. I think they know full well that there are consequences to the things you say. What that means is that as an artist, you are putting a piece of your soul into your work. You are bearing a piece of yourself to the world, to your audience. And that's a risk. That takes guts. That's like, you're exposing yourself, essentially. That's the risk that you take as an artist. But that's not a risk that you really take as a critic. That isn't to say that you can't, really express yourself and expose yourself and be open and take that risk of vulnerability in a review. See Shammy's Outer Wilds review. But it is to say that Mahler and his crew do not do that when they review things. They do not expose themselves as people. They do not express their inner vulnerabilities or their innermost beliefs, because they're stuck doing this neutrality thing where they can't express, the things that they think about the world too much, or, they're being political, and that's bad. Or, they'll alienate some of their audience that might disagree with them. And I know for sure Mahler has just straight up said that he's not really interested in making any art of his own. And of course, like, that's fine if you don't want to do that. But, like, that does mean you aren't going to be taking the risk that an artist takes. The kind of risk that critics don't tend to take. And also, we kind of missed the point about a thing that a gal said in one of her reviews. This is kind of unrelated, but I remember a woman was talking about her, experiences as a woman. And she was saying, like, when I'm walking alone at night, I have to take note of all these, like, points along my walk, because I'm thinking, like, I might have to duck into one of these places if I'm in danger. Talking about these systems that she has as a woman to basically, like, guard herself from violence, because these are things that women have to do because there is a systemic problem of violence against women, and women, like, being victims of assault and other things. And, in comes Mahler, the king of neutrality, the king-centrist king. Both sides have it bad to say, well, you know what? I had a friend or a roommate or something, and his girlfriend threw a TV at him. And we can all acknowledge that's bad. That's like kind of batshit, and she sounds abusive. Most certainly a bad thing that happened. That is not up for debate. She sounds like a bad person. That is not up for debate. But also, you missed the point, my good sir. This isn't about bad things happening to people of a particular gender. This is about systemic issues that exist for just this side of the gender spectrum, right? That isn't to say that women or men don't have their own like systemic issues, but you know, you also shouldn't bring that up in as a counterpoint to the same thing being said about women, because you'll look like a jackass. Not to sound like a centrist myself, but you know, we can have a conversation about both. But at the end of the day, men do tend to have the more privileged position in society. And so, one person is talking about systemic issues, so you can't really counter with, I had a guy who had a bad thing happen to him, had a woman victimize him. Yes, women do victimize men, but the majority of women have been victimized by men. Did I say that? Men have been victimized by women. That is a fact, absolutely. And one of the systemic issues you can talk about is people not taking male survivors seriously. That is a very big problem. Then you go to the other side. Oh, people don't take women survivors seriously either. People don't take trans or queer survivors seriously. And then there's also all these other systemic issues that women face, and the majority of women have been victimized by men. So I don't like, comparing traumas. I don't like the old trauma Olympics as another artifact of, or no, it was the oppression Olympics. That's another artifact from 2016 anti-SJW culture. But, that's not a counter to what she said. I don't even remember what episode that was. I don't remember the context. I just remember that, and I remember in retrospect thinking, oh, it's kind of a stupid thing to say, thinking that you countered what she said. Anyway, I think that'll do. I've talked about this for a long fucking time. I had a lot to say. So, once again, maybe next time I'll talk about arches, or maybe I'll just keep stringing my couple of viewers along. We'll see.
You think I want to sit here and talk about Kyle Rankin's school shooting fan fiction?